Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher, welcome to my world, and welcome to another edition of Jack Quick Reacts. There's no script, there's no editing, there's no larger video essay, it's just me talking to my mic, reacting to something awesome, and I just saw Across the Spider-Verse, so yeah, I definitely have something awesome to react to right now. And this is probably a movie that I have been the most excited and intrigued about in quite some time, because Into the Spider-Verse, the first movie, the one that introduced Miles Morales to a whole new audience, it really kind of came out of nowhere. When I saw that movie, I was like, I did not know what to make of it. I was certainly curious about it. I mean, I knew of Miles Morales from the comics, but I had no idea, how they were going to tell his story in this form. I mean, the movie did not look anything like any other superhero movie I'd seen, which is part of what made it so memorable and so stunning. And it was definitely a movie that made the case that, there's a much larger universe of Spider-Man stories worth telling, and they don't have to involve Peter Parker. And keep that in mind, because that's going to be a major theme coming up. But the story that began Into the Spider-Verse is greatly expanded upon in Across the Spider-Verse. This is a movie that if it doesn't just raise the stakes in terms of in terms of moving Miles' story forward, it really does it raises the bar for what a Spider-Man story could be, not just in terms of what he has, who he has to battle and what he has to save, but just the larger idea of being Spider-Man in the first place. I know that sounds a little heady, but trust me, this movie definitely takes a big multiverse spanning picture of what it means to be Spider-Man, and that is a theme and a story that's worth telling. So, and this is a movie that will definitely expand your perspective on Spider-Man in all the right ways. So now, before I go any further, let me just say this: I'm gonna have to touch on some spoilers, and this is one of those movies that you do not want to see, that you definitely want to see unspoiled. This movie has, just because of the twists and turns in this movie, there are some things that were not revealed in the trailer. There are some things that are some major twists that you don't expect, and I'm gonna have to touch on a few of them. But trust me, if you want to see the movie unspoiled, I highly recommend it, because that definitely heightens the impact. And this movie is all about having a really strong, dramatic impact on so many levels. And it's not just because of Miles' story. In fact, when the movie begins, Miles isn't the first Spider character we see. It's actually Spider-Gwen. Now, if you saw the first Spider-Verse movie, Spider-Gwen, she showed up about midway through the movie. There were some hints and teases here and there about what happened with her and how her story was different. But this movie fleshes that out in much greater detail, and it closely parallels the comics version of Spider-Gwen in that it shows in her universe, she was bitten by the radioactive spider and not Peter. But she was still close friends with Peter. But unfortunately, since he didn't become Spider-Man, he was still nerdy, he was still bullied, and he tried to be, he wanted to be special like Gwen. He wanted to, be special like Spider-Gwen, and that cost him his life, and it's something that Gwen feels very much responsible for, and this causes some serious conflicts in her universe, especially with her father, who's a cop in this who's still a cop. He's a cop in the comics too, but this universe, it puts her at really heavy odds with her dad, and that's also a recurring theme about having these Spider-Man characters struggling to relate with their parents and their loved ones. So, and it's because of that she's also without her version of Peter, the only really close friend she made was with Miles, and you can tell she misses him and he misses her, and it's very clear that he misses her not just as a friend. There's definitely some more some romantic subplots going on between them. It's something that's actually commented on by Spider-Man India later on, who we do run into, who is also he's a nice gem of a character that I'll touch on a bit later. But these two definitely formed a really close connection in the first Spider-Verse movie, and it's a huge factor in this movie as well. And Eventually, their paths do cross again, but there was also it's also established early on. There's a reason why their paths, why they didn't visit each other, why they were unable to reconnect. And this is kind of where the main conflict comes in. It involves two main antagonists, not villains, more like antagonists. One is the Spot. Now, if you've read Spider-Man comics for any length of time, you probably have heard of the Spot, but he is essentially, in the comics, he's basically a C or D-list villain. He is not. He is no Green Goblin. He is no Doc Ock. He is really not. He's always been sort of a joke of a villain. But he is actually, and that's kind of how he starts here. He's actually someone that Miles comes across. But we find out very quickly that the Spot, his story is closely related to Miles and Spider-Man's story, and more so than most villains. He exists because of Miles, and he's kind of bumbling at first. He's not exactly a criminal mastermind, but trust me, as the movie unfolds, he really evolves into a truly menacing villain. Someone who is, I won't put him on the same level as Kingpin or Norman Osborn, but he becomes a really serious threat. And that's also kind of where Miguel O'Hara comes in. Now, Miguel O'Hara is Spider-Man 2099. And if you're a comic fan of a certain age, you probably remember the 2099 comics. And Miguel O'Hara, his version, he's the Spider-Man 2099, and he was probably the most successful and the most well-known character from those comics. But the Miguel from those comics is very different from the one that we see in this movie. This movie, I wouldn't call him a villain, but he is definitely someone who is antagonistic to Miles and Gwen and pretty much everyone, even Jessica Drew, the voice of Spider-Woman in this. He's also kind of the he's also very much the one who's kind of trying to see the Spider-Verse from he's not just trying to defend his world, he's trying to defend the whole entirety of the Spider-Man multiverse. And his reasons for doing so, he's not just doing that because it needs doing. We find out early on that he tried to essentially have it all in a sense. He tried to essentially find a universe or create his own personal narrative in which he had everything. But in doing so, it came at a serious price and it did serious damage to the larger multiverse. And that is sort of and that cost him a great deal. I mean, there's a really powerful, really tragic sequence with him that you understand why he's doing what he's doing. You understand why he's kind of he's kind of an ass for most of this movie. But why he's doing this is actually is a big reason why this where a lot of the secrets come in, a lot of things that Gwen didn't, that Miles didn't know. We find out, this is a bit of a spoiler, but we find out that Miles Morales was not supposed to become Spider-Man. Now, what I mean by that is not just that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The spider that bit him into the Spider-Verse was actually not a spider from his universe. That spider should not have been in his universe, and because of that, the Peter Parker in that universe should not have died. And so that whole disruption, it's kind of brings into this concept of what is canon. Now, if you're a comic fan, canon is kind of this idea that these events, these characters, these stories are what actually quote unquote count. This is kind of the canon of what we expect Spider-Man to be, and something that deviates from that is either fan fiction or something that should not be, or some kind of just perversion or deviation. Well, in this movie, the idea of canon is it kind of crafts this narrative that Spider-Man and a universe with Spider-Man has to have a certain type of narrative. And there are certain things that need to happen for that universe to stay intact. I mean, we see that with Spider-Man India. We see that with Spider-Gwen. We see that with Peter B. Parker, who comes back with a baby in tow, little Mayday Parker. I'll get to her later. But but if something breaks that narrative, that doesn't just have consequences for that universe. It has consequences for the entire multiverse. And Miles is basically a walking, living embodiment of that problem. In that, he shouldn't have been Spider-Man, and the Spider-Man in his universe should not have died. Now, should is kind of that's kind of the operative word there. That's something that comes into play later on. But the whole story about, hey, this should not have happened. Miles should never have been Spider-Man. It kind of feels meta on a certain level, because I remember when Miles Morales was first introduced in the comics, there was some opposition. I mean, there's still a sizable contingent of fans who believe Spider-Man is Peter Parker. No one else can be that without it being some crazy what if or weird alternate universe. But since then, in the comics, Miles definitely proved that he is worthy of being Spider-Man. He proved that he can handle the responsibility. He proved that he deserves to be on the same level as Peter. But in this movie, Across the Spider-Verse, makes the case that the fact that he shouldn't be Spider-Man is causing serious disruptions, not just to his universe, but to other universes. And towards the end, we kind of find out the ramifications of what happens when there's a universe with the wrong Spider-Man and a universe with no Spider-Man. So there's these, and because of that, Miguel O'Hara, he has basically an entire legion of Spider-Man from multiple universes, including some really weird versions that have shown up in some really strange comics, including there's a Spider-Man version of a T-Rex, a Spider-Man version of a cat. There's a cowboy Spider-Man, and trust me, there are a few scenes in this movie where I imagine fans are going to be pausing it and trying to pick out which Spider-Man this is. But the core theme, the fact that they're all there, that's great fan service, but it's not just fan service. There's a much more serious plot going on, in the sense that Miles should not have his very presence is a disruption. He should not have, not only should he not have been Spider-Man, but he has to essentially, they cannot let him continue to do what he's doing. Otherwise, he's going to cause even more disruptions. And fortunately, but if he's not allowed to be Spider-Man, people he cares about are going to get hurt. And this is kind of where his parents come in. And I got to say, his parents play a much, much bigger role in this movie compared to the first movie. His parents, Jefferson and Rio, they definitely raised the bar for superhero parenting. They kind of feel a lot like Jonathan and Martha Kent in a lot of ways, in that they really do want what's best for their son. They try to set a good example for him, but he's a 15-year-old boy. He has his own idea of what he wants to do, and they have an idea of what they want him to do, and they're not on the same page. But at the same time, Miles, he will go out of his way for his parents. He makes it clear that he loves his parents, but at the same time, what they want for him and what he wants, it causes a lot of conflict that, kind of is what drives him to venture into the multiverse in the first place, because he feels like if he's stuck there, the future they want for him is one where he's basically never going to go journey into the multiverse again. He'll never see Gwen again or Peter B again, and that's not something he wants. That's it's clear even before Miguel comes into the picture. He wants to reconnect with the friends he made, because he's still not over the loss, the death of his uncle. He's still not over. He still doesn't seem to have a lot of other friends other than his friend Genke, who didn't really play much of a role in this movie. But it's understandable. That's one of the best strengths of this movie. You understand the motivations of every character involved, and you understand where a lot of this drama comes from. I mean, there's some. It's a movie that it starts off pretty lighthearted, but it becomes really serious and really dramatic and kind of dark in a few areas later on, especially towards the end. Now, fair warning: you see this movie, it ends on a cliffhanger. Like an Empire, not an Empire Strike, not quite on the level of Empire Strikes Back, but pretty damn close. And I gotta say, when you see that, when you see the ending to this movie, you're going to be really impatient to see the next one, which is Beyond the Spider-Verse. So, yeah, I won't spoil all the details for that, but I will say that the high drama of this movie, it really does build up in all the right ways. It kind of puts Miles and eventually Spider-Gwen, it puts them in a position where they have to make some hard choices about, are they really, because they understand what Miguel's saying. They even see firsthand at one point what happens when something breaks canon. Like, that's where they get to meet with Spider-Man India. They see, why canon matters so much and how dangerous it can be when something happens that isn't supposed to happen, or where something doesn't happen that's supposed to happen. It's I know that's kind of confusing, but it's fits into this whole theme about what needs to happen for Spider-Man to be Spider-Man. There's this whole idea that anything that deviates too much is going to essentially ruin everything, not just for Spider-Man, but for his entire universe. So, I mean, that's a very high level, very meta type story, but it's one that fits perfectly within the themes of it fits perfectly with the theme the first movie established, and really kind of expands here. And you get the sense that there's that towards that at some point, Miguel, the Spot, Miles, they're going to at some point there's going to be a clash, and something has to change within the multiverse, because it's like an unstoppable force and an immovable object. Even though Miles wasn't supposed to be Spider-Man, too late, he is Spider-Man. Even though certain events aren't supposed to happen, they did happen. And there's other events that are meant to happen that Miles wants to stop, and that Miguel says, you have to let this happen. Otherwise, you're risking just a few lives for an entire multiverse. So that's another really tough equation. I mean, we've seen it play out in other superhero movies before as well, but the idea of one life being worth an entire multiverse, that's a tough calculus to make. But what makes it work in this movie is that it always feels personal. It feels dramatic, and there's it's the drama's pretty intense too. I mean, this movie might not be it's not an R-rated movie or anything like that. It doesn't try to be like Infinity War or anything like that, or Endgame, but it's very serious in how it makes the case that even if even within an entire multiverse, the few lives that are their loved ones still matter to you, and when others are trying to say, hey, you have to be willing to sacrifice some lives in order to keep the universe intact. That's not something that's a tough position for anyone, superhero or otherwise, and it's an impossible position, but one that some would struggle with. But Miles, he doesn't. There's really not much of a struggle, in the sense he knows what the right thing is, and it's everyone else around him, Miguel, Gwen, even Peter B to some extent. They don't seem to understand. They don't seem to grasp why he's so determined to to save the lives that matter to him. And it kind of, he knows what's at stake, but he doesn't hesitate to make the right call, what he believes to be the right call. And it puts him at odds with pretty much every Spider-Man in the multiverse. But at the end of the day, I think his actions say a lot more than anything else, and it resonates. I mean, again, Gwen definitely plays a bigger role, especially towards the end. Also, Peter B, he doesn't really show up until the second half of the movie, but when he does, he definitely helps balance things out a bit, mostly because he has little baby Mayday Parker. If you're a fan of Spider-Man comics from the early 90s, you remember Mayday Parker is actually Spider-Girl from the early 90s, and she is by far one of the most adorable things in this movie. And every scene with her is memorable. I mean, she's basically to this movie what Baby Yoda is to Star Wars. She steals every scene she's in, and she also, she does play she doesn't get to play much of a role, but she does at one point, and trust me, you'll know when you see it. But the real heart of this story is that Miles Morales, he is his own version of Spider-Man, but in his version of Spider-Man is, it runs contrary to what other Spider-Men think that it needs to be. They see him as an anomaly, a disruption, something that should never have been. But it's too late. They can't undo what happened. He is Spider-Man in his universe, and he's going to, they need his universe to play out a certain way to protect the multiverse, but that involves putting people Miles loves at risk. And there's no way to get around that. And he definitely towards the end he shines in all the right ways. I mean, he is the Spider-Man that he needs to be, and he kind of shows even other versions of Peter Parker that, hey, you know what? This kid understands the burdens and the responsibilities more so than many of the others, and it's a hell of a ride. And I got to say also, the visuals in this movie are incredible. Like, this is a movie that could never have been done in live action. It probably never could have been done in like a Pixar style animation or a traditional, cartoonish animation. This is a movie this movie's style is it is perfect for the type of story it tells. And it's an incredible story, an incredible ride. It's just the only downside I would say to it is it ends on a cliffhanger. And trust me, when Beyond the Spider-Verse comes out, there's going to be a lot of anxious fans who want to see what happens next. And when you see those final scenes, you'll understand why. So I guess I'm going to leave it at that. Again, if you loved Into the Spider-Verse, you'll love this movie. So yeah, definitely check it out when you get a chance. And thanks everyone for joining me on another edition of Drac Quick Reacts. Thanks again for joining me in my world. And until next time, take care and stay safe, everyone.